Good afternoon, everyone. I probably should start by making it clear by background I'm an historian. So this afternoon I'm probably going completely against the grain here. I tried to avoid turning this into a lecture. Instead, what I want to focus in on instead is to try to outline to you a range of resources that we have on the CAIN website relating to this particular year of 1968, but also, if you like, the wider picture of the 1960s, the emergence of the Civil Rights Campaign, and some of the causes and consequences of that. I normally begin these occasions by just giving a brief introduction to what CAIN is. CAIN simply stands for Conflict Archive on the Internet. It's a web-based resource providing information and source material on the Northern Ireland conflict and politics from 1968 onwards. But we have some material predating 1968. It's largely from that period. The project itself began back in 1986, and the website itself went online in 1987. So CAIN's been going just over now 20 years. Like most places, the University of Ulster, what it is now known as the Ulster University, keeps rebranding itself. So we're now officially LB, taken out and punished by the Vice-Chancellor if I don't use the proper term. CAIN's based at Ulster University, and it's now based within the School of Applied Social and Policy Sciences. In terms of CAIN itself, CAIN is now recognised as one of the leading online resources on the Northern Ireland Troubles. And just a little bit of, to give you an idea of how popular and how well used CAIN is. Since we began back in 20 odd years ago, there's been some 21 million page views, 21 million visits to CAIN, and some 80 million page views. And over the past year, we've been averaging around 40,000 unique visitors to the site, and they in turn download something in the region of 200,000 page views. We tend to find that up to 2/3 of our users come from outside Britain and Ireland, across Europe, Australia, New Zealand, North America. Recently, when we've been monitoring downloads from CAIN, we were struck by someone seemed to be using the site quite a bit in Malaysia of all places, and we couldn't understand what was going on. And then a colleague of ours who had been visiting that part of the world said, well, there's a university that's just started an Irish Studies course, and obviously all the students were using CAIN. And you'll find scores of CAIN, or scores of citations relating to CAIN's books, journal articles, and media reports. And also, some people already have spotted this. But a couple of weeks ago, the BBC began to put up some of their old film archives relating to the 1960s. And if this works, fingers crossed. They approached the CAIN. They were putting up the material, the film clips online, but they were very keen to have anybody viewing the material, try to give them some kind of a context and background of what they were looking at. So they approached CAIN to say they were aware of CAIN's the resources in CAIN, and said, well, is there any possibility that we could link up our material to what the film material that we're being putting up. So if I scroll down to the bottom of the page, you'll find there's a lot of buttons at the bottom relating to CAIN material. And so for instance, something I'll be going on to a little bit later, that takes us to some of the PRONI documents that we have on CAIN from the Public Records Office. So again, someone viewing the BBC site should be able to view that. Now I was trying to In terms of some of the material on CAIN relating to the civil rights movement, I was trying to maybe categorise it for the audience to say, okay, well, what is it we have on CAIN? So I've sort of divided it into 5 main points here. You'll find material relating to the origins of the civil rights movement. You'll find material relating to some of its demands and its methods they were using. Different attitudes to the campaign in Northern Ireland. Response of the authorities in Belfast, Dublin and London to what was happening on the ground. And finally, the impact and long-term consequences of the campaign itself. In terms of if people were looking for material relating to the civil rights campaign, and they came to, we got an email or a phone call saying, where would I start? There's probably 3 areas or 3 main sections on the CAIN that we would point them to. First of all, we have what we call background information. Secondly, we have key events and key issues. Key events and then key issues. And just to give you an illustration of some of these. First of all, in terms of background information, funny, I was listening to the BBC News last night at 6 o'clock, and obviously the news was dominated by Brexit. But at the end of one of the reports, the newsreader turned and said, for anyone out there who's struggling with the jargon, with the terms being used, here's a little thing on the BBC website called the Jargon Buster. So what we have here is our attempt to try to give people some kind of background, some kind of introduction to the material. So for instance, there's another couple of examples I want to highlight to you. Firstly, we have something called the CAIN chronology, which runs from 1968 onwards. And basically what we have here is, if you like, is a little running commentary of what happened on a particular day, particular month, or a particular year. It's a good way to get people started. Secondly, we have those glossary of terms, of organisations, of terms, of acronyms. If people are struggling with what's the difference between the CSJ, the NICRA, the PDs, or the DHAC, hopefully that will get them some kind of an idea on those terms. In addition, we have something called the CAIN bibliography, which is a searchable database of material. Currently stands at something in the region of 18,000 entries, so people can search the CAIN bibliography by year, by author, or also by terms. So for instance, if you were to type in the civil rights or the Derry March, that will throw you up a list of the material we have on CAIN. And finally, I just wanted to draw people's attention to, as well as all the written material we have on CAIN, we have a number of photographic collections. And the example I wanted to show you this afternoon comes from a man called Eamon Malloch. Eamon is a native of Derry. He was politically active throughout the 1960s. But he also, for us, very importantly for us, he was also an amateur photographer. So when Eamon went out on demonstrations or meetings, whatever it was, he frequently brought his camera with him. And I was thinking about this recently, a couple of weeks ago. I was doing a presentation to some school kids, and I looked at the audience, and they all had their smartphones. Probably if we asked everybody today, you've all brought them with you. And we're so used nowadays of just taking out, if you see something, taking out a camera and snapping an instant photograph of it. But many of us actually keep those photographs a month, 6 months later, a year. Do we just delete them? And this is, if you like, an era when some people didn't have a camera, or a camera was seen as a luxury item. It certainly wasn't something you took out on every occasion. It was used, I don't know, I think of my own childhood to birthdays, Christmas, holidays, stuff like that there. But Eamon took his camera with him, and what we have, I think, is a very good, if you like, a little social record of the city, of the changing city during the 1960s, as it begins the era of the civil rights movement and some of the traumatic events that then follow. So it's a little, again, another little useful tool for people to have. Okay, rather than jump from the PowerPoint presentation to the website and website and presentation. I'll just finish the remainder of the talk by looking at the going straight to the website itself. So the second section I pointed people to was something called key events, and what we have here are, if you like, a number of, if you like, widely seen turning points in the recent history of Northern Ireland. We have, if you like, 5 of those, but also a listing of some other, if you like, important events which flow from those. So obviously the first one to begin, given the nature of today's talk, is on the Civil Rights Campaign. And most of these sections related to key events, they're all, if you like, a standard format. We give people, if you like, a introductory page saying this is where you'll find some basic information. But also then, if you want to go a little bit further and begin to search for material, you have various sources or various ways of doing that. So, for instance, in terms of the Civil Rights Campaign, I just wanted to pick out a couple of examples. So, for instance, we have some of the technology always beats you, so I'll go back to, I'll go into reverse and go back to some of the so for instance, if I had been able to show them 2 examples of some source material. The first of these is, I'll just show you to them by hand. The first of these is the, if you like, the first pamphlet produced by the Campaign for Social Democracy back in 1964, the Plain Truth. And again, people can, you know, download, look at this from wherever they may be, and be able to access that particular document. The second example comes from again, this time a government publication. Again, I'm feeling probably slightly nostalgic this morning or this afternoon. I was thinking again, today we're all so used to tweeting and Facebooking that if you believe there was a time when people wanted to get their message across, they actually had to go and publish or print something, write something down, and then go and print it. So it's a similar, that first example from the Campaign for Social Justice was an attempt to, if you like, set out some of the case for the campaign or the Campaign for Civil Rights in Northern Ireland. In turn, we have a little document, government document called Fact and Falsehood, produced by the Northern Ireland government from the late 1960s. And again, if you like, it's setting out the case to rebut the allegations of the Civil Rights Campaign. Second, final example I wanted to give you was of the sections on CAIN where you would find material relating to the Civil Rights Campaign. Would it be on something called key issues? We're all aware that out of the troubles that emerged from the late 1960s onwards, there were a number of, if you like, key issues, key themes that people have written extensively on. So again, the example I was going to show you from today was from discrimination. This probably won't work either. So for instance, if people wanted to look at some of the, track down some material, for instance, I was recently looking through this and it sort of struck me, again going back to my student days, we were made very aware of that back in the 1980s there was a series of articles in a journal called the British Journal of Sociology where academics, if you like, debated whether how bad the extent of discrimination in Northern Ireland. So again, that's a little list for people to search for. I think you can actually find most of those material now online, but also again an article that a lot of us would have used quite a bit was this famous article by John White from 1983 from the Journal of Contemporary Irish Studies, which looked and debated the whole question of how much discrimination there was under the unionist regime. Okay, so I said I wasn't going to try not to give a lecture on the Civil Rights Movement or the year of 1968. So instead what I thought I would try to do was highlight, if you like, a case study to highlight some of the material, some of the resources that we have. So the obvious one seemed to be was the recent anniversary of the Derry March on the 5th of October 1968. So again, you'll find a range of materials relating to that we have on CAIN, but also we point out to other resources that are out there as well that people might want to use. So for instance, from the RTE website, they have made available a range of film clips and sound recordings of the period. And I think, if you remember, RTE were the only, if you like, TV company there that day who actually were there to record the events. And anytime you see any of the clips on TV, it comes from that original RTE coverage. So I know people have probably seen this already, but let me just use it because it's what I want to go on to talk about. So that's one way to look at the events of the day. Another example would be to look at some of the other resources we have in CAIN. And you've all on your seats, Graham and Wesley were putting out some of the work that CAIN has done with the Public Records Office of Northern Ireland. What we've tried to do is to digitise and select a small collection of government records relating to this particular period of time. And the first example of this comes from the print in these documents on screen often are very, very faint. So this is I found in some of the files here. This is the request made by the organisers of the march back in September 1968, requesting that they hold the parade in Derry on the 5th of October, outlining the time, date, and the route that the march would take. As we're all aware, that was met by response from the Northern Ireland government. And again, this is the order signed by the then Minister of Home Affairs, William Craig, actually prohibiting the march taking place along the route that they had requested. So again, a couple of examples of that. I wanted to finish off by, again, if people can remember back to the little film clip, and to try to examine how it's often the case, and if you like, in terms of a historical event, people can often agree that something happened on a particular day, but there's often very different interpretations as to what then occurred. People often look at it in different ways and different responses. And I wanted to focus in on one of the more famous incidents of the parade in Derry that day, and it relates to the then Westminster MP for West Belfast, Jerry Fitt. Jerry Fitt was, one of the images of the day was Jerry Fitt received a headwind that day. And I think the Ulster Library or the Ulster Museum amongst their exhibitions still have some of the clothing he was wearing that day. And this is an image of his blood-scattered shirt. So that happened. But there are different interpretations as to what was then to occur. And these come from two documents, again coming from the files here at the Public Records Office. The first of these is written by Inspector William Mahard. If you remember back to the film clip, the police officer speaking through the mic was Mahard. And Mahard was the police officer in charge of operations that day. And in a memo he writes a couple of days later, a short memo, he gives his account of what happened on the particular day. And not surprisingly, it's a justification setting out the case for what the police did that day. They were there to look after an illegal march. They were trying to carry out the letter of the law. They were then subsequently attacked by protesters as they carried out their duty. And he, in this little memo, he talks about what happened to Fitt. And I'll maybe just read it out to you because unfortunately the text is so faint on this you probably wouldn't be able to read it from the floor. And I'm reading this from the actual document itself. Perhaps one should at this juncture recount what happened to Jerry Fitt. A further report will follow. During the scuffles, Mr. Fitt sustained a superficial laceration about half an inch long to the top of the head and the vault of the skull. 2 stitches were inserted. In his attempt to get through the police cordon, and although informed by a sergeant, and I'm quoting from the sergeant, "Sorry, you're not going through," Mr. Fitt replied, "I am going through." He made a dive at the sergeant with his head down and batted the sergeant with his head. The sergeant caught him around the shoulders. While the sergeant was holding him by the shoulders, a pole, believed to be a banner pole, skimmed the sergeant's head. The sergeant saw blood coming from Mr. Fitt's head. The sergeant gave him a clean handkerchief, and Mr. Fitt said, "I am Jerry Fitt. It is not your fault. You had a job to do." The sergeant arrested him for disorderly behaviour and obstructing the police in the execution of their duty, and conveyed him to Victoria Police Station. From there he was taken to hospital. He arrived at approximately 4:20 and was discharged between 4:50 and 5 o'clock. In contrast to Mahard's account is a document drawn up by 3 Labour MPs, visiting Labour MPs from Westminster, who had been invited by Fitt to come along to the march as observers. And they, not surprisingly, give a very, very different account to that of Mahard in terms of what happened on the day that peaceful protesters were attacked by the police. And they also referred to what happened to Jerry Fitt. And again, I'll quote from the document itself. "The marchers approached the police, and when they were about a yard from the police ranks and obviously slowing up, the police opened up a passage into which were pulled Mr. Fitt, Mr. Devlin and Mr. Fitt. Mr. Fitt was struck with a baton, and Mr. Fitt was struck twice. They were taken away. Mr. Fitt was to have 3 stitches inserted in the head wound." So 2 very different accounts of one particular event. I'll finish off by again referring to a document from files here at PRONI of a meeting held in Downing Street on the 4th of November 1968. And again, one of the interesting aspects of the recent anniversary for me was I've taken this little news clipping from the Irish Times, and again a lot of the coverage was focused on 50 years ago today, a civil rights march and the start of the Troubles. So obviously there's a lot of debate around whether the 5th of October should be seen as the date of when the Troubles start. Now, you'll be glad to hear I'm not here to talk about that. Instead, what I suggest was that no matter what side of the argument you take regards to that assertion, things were not to be the same in Northern Ireland after the 5th of October. And there are lots of examples that you could draw upon. But the one I wanted to refer to today was this meeting from the 4th of November 1968. This meeting at Downing Street, and it's those present include a team of Northern Ireland ministers, Terence O'Neill, William Craig and Brian Faulkner, and on the British government side, Harold Wilson and Jim Callaghan. And I probably shouldn't say this, but I shouldn't have favourite documents that I identify and ask here to be digitised and selected. But I'll say, rather than have favourite documents, I maybe have favourite categories of documents. And by that I mean I liked documents which, if you like, counter the argument that what we often have here is, if you like, just a written account of a meeting that happened. X said this, Y said that, and it's written up a couple of days later and people come along and then read it. But if you read a lot of these documents, you can almost, if you like, feel yourself being sitting in the room. As you read the document, you can almost have a sense of the atmosphere, what it would have been like sitting in the cabinet room in 10 Downing Street this day. And this document is no exception to that. In fact, one biographer of Terence O'Neill talked about the Northern Ireland ministerial team getting a bit of a roasting this day. And it's a very, if you like, it gives a full account of that meeting, that for the British government, for Harold Wilson's government in particular, the time had come for action. They weren't prepared to sit back any longer and say, allow the Northern Ireland government to move at its own pace, but they were now demanding action straight away. And it was often in very vibrant terms. There were threats to reduce the Northern Ireland grant to perhaps even look at Northern Ireland's constitutional position within the United Kingdom. And in return, the ministerial team from the Northern Ireland government attempt to hold the line and say, give us an opportunity, give us the time, and some of those demands and some of the problems that you're telling us to act upon, we will deal with them, but we will deal with them in our own time. Now, the meeting was held on the 4th of November. A couple of weeks later after that, the Northern Ireland government then announces its five-point reform programme. So events then subsequently flow from there. So I've probably already run out of time, so I'll maybe stop there and allow the rest of the speakers to have their opportunity. Thank you.
Okay, so good afternoon. I am Samantha McComb. I am the librarian of the Linen Hall Library, and I am pleased to be here this afternoon to give a general overview of the Northern Ireland political collection. By way of background, the Belfast Library and Society for Promoting Knowledge, the official name of the institution more commonly known as the Linen Hall Library, developed from the Belfast Reading Society, which was founded on the 13th of May 1788. It is the oldest library in Belfast, and it's the last subscription library in Ireland. The Society was a local expression of a widespread British, European and North American movement for self-improvement. Such reading societies sprang up in many cities, towns and villages, and were particularly influenced in Ireland in the latter part of the 18th century by the liberal and egalitarian principles of the American and French revolutions. They were also influenced by the spread of literacy and the high cost of books and the consequent necessity for individuals to band together to be able to afford works of importance. From its beginnings, the Belfast Library and Society for Promoting Knowledge was an institution whose central aim was to run a subscription library for the benefit of its members. It appears from our minute books there were some 15 founding members, and signatory to the original rules of the Society included Roger Mulholland, who was a builder and architect and who was the Society's first president, and Robert Carey, who was the first librarian. I am the 22nd librarian. The Society moved around Belfast before settling in the White Linen Hall in 1802, and there it remained until 1888, when new premises had to be secured. The new premises were a block of buildings at the corner of Donegal Square North and Fountain Street, which was a former linen warehouse, and is where the library is still housed today. So, turning to the collections themselves, as a membership library, we have an extensive general lending collection for the benefit of our members, of which we have approximately 2,700. If you're not a member, I do encourage you to consider becoming one. Crime fiction is particularly popular, with Ian Rankin being the most borrowed author in recent years, not something I think people expect from an 18th century institution. But our strengths lie in our Irish and local studies collections. The library has a comprehensive collection of early Ulster printing. The Belfast printed books is a real treasure of the library, while the provincial printed books collection covers the rest of Ulster and includes the earliest printing from major centres such as Derry, Newry and Strabane. We also have fantastic resources to support genealogy and the study of family histories, strong Irish language and Ulster Scots collections, while the Gibson collection is the largest collection of material relating to Robert Burns outside of Scotland. Amassed by Andrew Gibson, who was a governor of the Linen Hall, it was bought for the city of Belfast for £1,000 in 1901 and was donated to the library. Imagine what it would be worth now. But our specialisms lie in having an expansive theatre and performing arts archive, and the definitive archive of the Troubles and subsequent peace process, which is the Northern Ireland Political Collection, which is one of our museum accredited collections. So, the NIPC. In 1968, the then librarian Jimmy Biddy, who was handed a civil rights leaflet in a city centre bar, he kept it and brought it back to the library, and since then the Linen Hall has sought to collect all printed material relating to the Troubles. Today, the Northern Ireland Political Collection contains over 350,000 items, and documents the troubles from the emergence of the civil rights movement in 1968 to the present day. To the best of our knowledge, it is the only collection to have been collected contemporaneously during a complete period of civil unrest. We believe no other institution has collected such a comprehensive range of materials relating to a modern political conflict. It documents the activities of all parties to the conflict, from paramilitaries to government, and we believe a large number of items in the collection are only held in the NIPC. As well as the traditional means of acquisition, because of the type of material being collected, the library had to be imaginative in its collecting. Contemporary accounts report that during the height of the Troubles, staff literally climbed over barricades to retrieve items, and up until relatively recently, there were outings with ladders and secateurs the day after elections to retrieve posters from lampposts. The team at the Linen Hall now try and photograph election posters, which is much less hazardous to health. Ephemera is a particular strength of the collection. Items such as news sheets and handbills were easily disposed of, and only for Jimmy Biddy's foresight, much of what we now hold would have been lost. Paramilitary and pressure groups had limited direct access to the media for propaganda purposes, so cheap print publications was really how they did get their messages across. Many of these had short print runs, and in a number of instances the library holds the only copies still in existence. So collecting such material was not easy, but once the collection became established, both political parties and paramilitary organisations from all sides readily donated their publications. And today we still rely on donations and are grateful to continue to receive items to enrich this fantastic collection. So as the only remaining subscription library in Ireland, we have independent status, which has meant that we have been able to collect and had the freedom to collect material without fear or favour. The Special Powers Act, which prohibited the possession of pro-paramilitary or anti-state publications, may have prevented the library from actively collecting seditious material. However, thanks to contacts in the establishment, the library was given assurances about possible prosecution. And the library has always prided itself on being a neutral space. It is a place where all shades of opinion can be consulted. Apparently, pre-peace process, an ex-chief constable and a leading member of the Republican movement often sat opposite each other in library when doing their research. But one of the challenges of archiving an ongoing conflict is the ever-present risk of losing the archive to the conflict itself. And on New Year's Eve in 1993, 3 incendiary devices were planted by the IRA in the library. The library was closed at the time, and luckily the NIPC was unscathed, but a number of books were destroyed in the Irish department. Now, apparently whoever planted the devices maybe didn't know about the NIPC and the rich material from the Republican perspective that it included, and an apology was printed in the War News column of An Phoblacht, which is the Sinn Féin newspaper, allegedly the only time the IRA ever apologised for an act. But the peace process saw not only a new era for Northern Ireland, but also for the NIPC, where focus shifted to the peace process and post-conflict resolution. By documenting the events of the last 50 years and making the material accessible, the library aims to play a vital role in contributing to a better understanding of all of Northern Ireland's pasts. And while we have collected without fear or favour, we jokingly say the NIPC contains something to offend everyone. Keep that in mind with some of the posters coming up. Today, the NIPC now holds over 17,000 books and pamphlets. They are held in what is known as the P sequence, which is each item added to the collection is assigned a P number, and it's just a running sequential number. So the first book in the P series is Divided Ulster, which you can see on the slide, while the last one added is the new publication Reporting the Troubles, which I catalogued last Friday, and it is P number 17897. An early publication in the collection is the Cameron Report from September 1969, which published the findings of the Cameron Commission into the clashes between security forces and civil rights protesters in Derry the previous year, a process which, as we've seen from the clip, had been televised and shown around the world. One of the most poignant books in the collection is Lost Lives from 2001, which gives individual accounts of the men, women and children who have died during the Troubles. But we also hold a comprehensive collection of fiction, poetry and drama related to the Troubles, and very timely to congratulate Anna Burns for winning the Man Booker Prize for Milkman, which is set during the Troubles, and she is the first writer from Northern Ireland to win this prestigious award. So in addition to books and pamphlets, the library also holds many significant archives which have been donated to the library. The Northern Ireland Civil Rights Association is one of the largest archives that we hold. There's over 30 boxes of archival material, such as correspondence, press releases, statements and newspaper cuttings. It really is a quite incredible archive. It is listed to item level. If anyone has interest in that particular archive, please do come and see it. There was a recent exhibition in the Linen Hall, I hope some of you may have seen it, Connecting Civil Rights Then and Now, which included some of the documents held in that archive. And we currently have on loan out a few items from the NICRA archive to the Tower Museum in Derry for their Speeches, Strikes and Struggles exhibition, which I believe is at the Nerve Centre's Visual Gallery in Ebrington, and it runs until December, so I highly recommend that. We also hold the Northern Ireland Women's Rights Archive, established in 1975. It acted as an umbrella organisation for women in both nationalist and unionist areas. It helped women cooperate on areas of commonality such as childcare, sex discrimination, and dealing with the challenging issues of domestic abuse. The Linen Hall also has the papers of Linda Walker, who was a leading figure in the movement. Paddy Devlin, who I think was in one of Brendan's slides, I saw his name at the bottom. He was also a high-profile politician, member of the 1974 Power Sharing Executive. His archive has a whole range of material on civil rights, the SDLP, the new Northern Ireland Labour Party, and an awful lot of material on boxing. He must have been avidly interested. Tom Hartley is one of the most prolific donors to the political collection. Not only is Mr. Hartley a leading figure in Sinn Féin, he's also a local historian. So in addition to donating significant Republican documents and artefacts, Tom has also given us a range of material from all shades of political and community opinion. And he has secured for the Linen Hall a collection of original speeches, which really are quite incredible. Recent donations include Jerry Adams' resignation speech, as well as Mary Lou MacDonald's acceptance speech. And finally listed here, Queerspace is a voluntary-led organisation who donated their archive to the Linen Hall. We do hold a substantial amount of insightful and informative LGBTQ material in the NIPC. So there are several thousand posters in the political collection. These posters give real insight into the period. They are the physical remnants of the times in which they were collected and serve as historical documents that help us to better understand those times, conveying the messages of the moment, stirring emotions, encouraging reflection, or in many cases promoting action. The image here is of the Linen Hall's first exhibition of political posters in 1986 under the title Troubled Images. The Troubled Images project in 2000 was revisited with a digitisation project which saw over 3,000 images which were then reproduced on CD-ROM, which at the time was groundbreaking technology. This was accompanied by an exhibition of 70 posters with a catalogue which included essays by leading academics and historians. The Troubled Images project has recently had a reboot with the production of an iBook version. All major events from the Troubles period are explored in a chronological, interactive history textbook for use in secondary schools, written by Dr. Gordon Gillespie in conjunction with the Linen Hall Library and developed in association with the Nerve Centre. This interactive resource has been designed for the revised curriculum at Key Stage 3, but also serves as a good general introduction to this period. The text is really highly illustrated with colourful and thought-provoking images from the Northern Ireland political collection. So some of the posters themselves. The poster on the left was displayed in the window of a house in Andersonstown during Christmas 1971 as part of continuing process against internment, which had been introduced in August. Coincidentally, I was born in August 1971, in the week in which internment was introduced. My mother tells that story to anyone that she meets, that she was in the maternity hospital as bullets were whizzing past the window. The candle echoes, the candle lit to mark the birth of Christ, but surrounded by barbed wire. And the Northern Ireland Civil Rights Association poster, which was simultaneously in circulation, also used a candle and barbed wire, but was derived from the Amnesty International logo and inspired by the proverb, better to light a candle than curse the darkness. In the 1970s, the REC produced these wanted posters in an attempt to catch the three most wanted men in Ireland at the time. It was Dominic McGlinchey, Ian Milne and Francis Hughes. The second poster is particularly interesting as 7 years later the REC were again trying to catch Dominic McGlinchey. However, in this poster they used a photo fit rather than an actual photograph. In August 1972, the confidential telephone was introduced. In the first 6 months of 1973, the REC claimed that just under 3,000 calls were received, and by 1974, the Northern Ireland office was spending more than half its advertising budget on this campaign. The poster and similar newspaper adverts were a feature of the government's response to the rise in violence of the 1970s, and advertisements continued until the 1990s. Loose talk, an IRA warning to informers. Loose talk costs lives was a Second World War warning about German spies, and whatever you say nothing was a response to mass Republican arrests on the evidence of Christopher Black in November and December of 1981. Black was one of these so-called supergrasses whose information is believed to have led to 232 arrests in 2 years. And as many as 200,000 attended the the Unionist rally at Belfast City Hall opposing the Anglo-Irish Agreement of November 1985. Both the event and this poster, which was designed by Cedric Wilson, consciously recalled the assembly in 1912 when around 250,000 gathered to sign the Ulster Covenant opposing Home Rule. The view of the crowd recalls souvenir posters and postcards that were issued 70 years earlier. Punning and graffiti techniques used in a government post-ceasefire good news campaign. Other posters of a similar ilk covered locations throughout Northern Ireland, in addition to Portadown. The subsidiary line, wouldn't it be great if it was like this all the time, is from Van Morrison's Days Like These, Days Like This. Also used in an aligned television advertising campaign, which I remember. Well, it got very irritating very quickly. So, something to offend everyone. The Pope at Dumcree, Rangers cap, orange sash, and the Vatican LOL, which is all pretty self-explanatory. This is one of the more recent donations in May 2017. Robert Bach presented Martin McGuinness's son with this portrait of his father, and Foblack reported it had sadly been anticipated as a retirement present rather than a memorial, but circumstances were such as they were. There were only 500 prints produced, and all are signed and stamped by the artist. And as previously mentioned, the library now collects photographs of election posters, and this is one from the Alliance Party. The Clean Neighbourhoods Act came into force in April 2012, which extended the powers of councils to follow up on reports of fly posting, and election posters may be erected up to 30 days before elections, but should be removed within 7 days of polling. Election posters have also got really boring. They are now just photographs of candidates with the name of the party and maybe a strap line. So they are all very similar, but some of the ones that we have in the collections from the 70s, 80s and 90s are just fantastic. You may all be aware of the Wave Goodbye to Dinosaurs, the Women's Coalition. Really interesting. In the early 1990s, it came to the library's attention that the NIO were planning to dispose of their press clippings, so the library offered them a good home, and this really is an invaluable resource for researchers. Original press cuttings put together by the NIO and divided into subject areas. They not only chronicle key players, but also contain coverage of major events such as Bloody Friday, the Brighton bombing, and the bombing at the Le Mans. And just very quickly, some examples of the type of ephemera that we have in the collections. This medal from Portadown District Loyal Orange Lodge No. 1 was, in their words, produced to commemorate the siege of Drumcree in July 1995. A nice detail is that on the medal the word siege is spelled incorrectly. And the University of Freedom mouse mat references that many Republican prisoners used their time in prison to develop their education by debating political strategy and ideology, reading widely and writing prolifically. In Christmas 1985, the library sent cards to every political contact it had, or more importantly, that it wanted, an exercise which has proved very successful, as we have been receiving cards for the political collection ever since. And these are just some examples. Derry Sinn Féin established its own Christmas postal service in the 1970s, a practice that its Belfast counterpart followed, and as part of the operation a different set of stamps were produced each year. 1981 depicted Republican hunger strikers who had died that year. 1982 was the design was a map of Ireland superimposed by Sinn Féin and the year. And just a few examples of the many, many, many flags that we hold in the collection. And just to demonstrate the breadth of the material that we hold, there's a few representations here. The 2 jars of preserves were produced for the Ulster Society. One contains King William's orange preserve marmalade. The other is the Black Man's Dream blackcurrant preserve. The Bigots Beer, which you can see, was part of an anti-sectarian campaign by the National Union of Students. It was described as a subtle blend of prejudice and denial and marked not to be exported. The humbugs and fudge, no comment whatsoever on my part, were sold in the Northern Ireland Assembly shop. And the collection also contains a number of artefacts, such as this chess set of political figures and defaced coins. Among the really unique materials are communications such as that of the Republican prisoner Tommy McKierney, who was then on hunger strike. He sent this communication to Amnesty International. It focuses on human rights issues and references state-authorised torture and repressive and draconian rules. The other is from a Republican A-wing in Armagh Women's Prison. It's a plea to Cardinal O'Fish, the then Primate of all Ireland, to issue a formal statement along with other religious leaders criticising the British government's handling of the prison crisis that had resulted in the hunger strikes. And just an example of many speeches that we have in the collection. This was delivered by UVF leader Gusty Spence on the 12th of July 1977. And we are very fortunate to have within the collection some incredible, amazing original cartoons, such as this one by Cormac, and the first day at Stormont by Ian Knox. This cartoon just depicts a possible scenario for the first day of the Northern Ireland Assembly. In the cartoon you will see there's a fight for the Speaker's chair, which is broken out between Alliance colleagues Lord Alderdice and Seamus Close. Monica McWilliams from the Northern Ireland Women's Coalition stands behind them. There is angelic imagery of John Hume's Seamus Mallon of the SDLP. They're depicted attempting to calm the situation while Jerry Adams and Martin McGuinness look on. Ian Paisley and Robert McCartney are dressed as Puritans carrying bombs with the word Drumcree, debate and decommissioning written on them. And David Trimble is depicted wearing a sash and being stabbed in the back by his own party. One of the daggers carries a barrister's wig, which is a reference to the group of young anti-agreement UUP members known as the Baby Barristers. We even have some concrete alleged to be from the walls of the Maze Prison. And alongside it's crafted by prisoners and given to their families before being donated to the library. And these are among the most remarked upon items on display in the library, and they are the keys to the old Springfield Road barracks, which were donated in 2002. So, pardon me, I think I've lost one there. Yeah, so around 6,000 videos, DVDs. We also have lots of vinyl records. Thank goodness vinyl's making a comeback because the Lennon Hall is well stocked. And for serious research purposes, there are some 2,500 individual periodical titles which cover the spectrum of political opinion. And for preservation purposes, there was a project to transfer the periodicals from 1969 to 1988 onto microfiche. And as part of the library's recent Divided Society project, we were able to digitise periodicals from the 1990s. And I'll just finish by briefly touching on the Divided Society project. In 2016, the library received funding from the Heritage Lottery Fund, Ulster Garden Villages and the Department of Foreign Affairs to undertake a major digitisation and outreach project entitled Divided Society. Focusing on the period 1990 to 1998, the project saw the digitisation of over 500 journals, comprising thousands of individual issues and around 800 posters. The Divided Society website is curated and focuses on 24 key themes such as ceasefires, decommissioning and elections. It also includes oral histories. One particular group that we worked with was the Women's Nurses History Group, and their oral histories are just incredible. We also have GCSE educational toolkits to complement the Northern Ireland curriculum. Hard to believe Northern Ireland in the 1990s is now being taught as a GCSE subject. Feels like it was 5 minutes ago. The resource is freely available in the UK and Ireland. You just need to sign up to get access, and I would strongly recommend that you do so if you haven't had a chance to look at it. The material on it is absolutely amazing. And finally, of the many endorsements of the political collection, this is one of my favourites. And those are our contact details. I hope I've given you a flavour of the Northern Ireland Political Collection at the Linen Hall. Contact details are here. There are tours of the library. Please do come and see us. And we always welcome donations to the NIPC, so if you have any material that you would like to donate, we would love to hear from you. Okay? Thank you.
I'm Graham Jackson, as Wesley says. I'm one of the archivists here, so I'm hopefully going to just explain a few things about who the Public Record Office is, why we keep records and the importance of them, and then to give you a few of the main archives that are relevant to civil rights and the whole conflict here. So I think we'll leave questions till the end, but certainly, as I said to the lady there who was asking, we're planning after this to take you upstairs to the reading room where we've got, Lorraine and myself have left out a number of documents which hopefully sort of stir up some interest in this, and I'll show you a little fraction of what we have, and we can answer questions then as well. So the Public Records Act, the reason we're employed and the reason you're sitting here, what is PRONI? The Public Records Act 1923 created us, and effectively it states that records, official records that is, are any court, government, records created by any court, government, department, authority or office in Northern Ireland with respect to which the Parliament of Northern Ireland had power to make laws. The Act is pretty much one of the oldest pieces of legislation we have, and some would argue, not us, but some would argue it's maybe out of date, but it is, we can make the shoe fit. It effectively represents what we do now as it did in 1923. We also hold imperial records. That's important for some of the students of this area of business, civil rights and the whole government interaction there. Some of the issues are covered by what are called reserved or accepted matters, not devolved. So we would have remit to take records that are imperial records, public records appertaining to Northern Ireland, to which the Act may be applied by any order made by the Governor of Northern Ireland under the provisions, and not being Northern Ireland records. Effectively, that's talking to things like national security, customs, things like that. We can take records from the Northern Ireland office, for example. We're the official place of deposit for all such records in Northern Ireland. Lorraine will talk about privately deposited records, which is a whole other area of business that we are responsible for. But from my side, it's official records. Under the Act, it effectively covers all the descriptive notions that they had at the time of what a record might be. Rules, records, writs, books, proceedings, decrees, bills, warrants, accounts, maps, papers, documents, parchments, anything under the sun. We now make that shoe fit the modern age, and in the 21st century we're talking about born digital, email, Word documents, spreadsheets, DVDs, and probably anything that has not been invented yet. So until the Act is revised, we're talking about everything that is technically fits the term of a record. Anything you come in here to look at will be called a record of some form. At the time, we really were only tasked with preserving. There was no real clear necessity they hadn't thought of Open Government or Freedom of Information Act, so the citizen hadn't really a strong voice to get a hold of records that we had closed. but we had a duty to create lists. The FOI turned that upside down in a good way, I stress. The archivist's world was effectively turned upside down positively, in that you now have a driver to ask for anything under the sun that we have, and we would have to tell you, if you can't see it, in plain English, why you can't see it. This one I'll try and rush through. It's just a large mouthful of why effectively we're in the job, and why we pick the records that we have, and why we have those records. There's primary value, which is the creator. So the Northern Ireland Office, the Minister of Home Affairs, the Cabinet, they created the records for evidential, administrative, legal or fiscal requirements. We then step in as the archivist and think of you, the researchers. And the researcher might have any number of motivations, might be academic, might be a personal thing, personally affected, you might have been involved yourself. Enduring historical research value is what we talk about, and it was not thought of at the time of creation. So that's why you'll see some of these records, A, that say secret and it's confidential, and B, you have at that time, not so much now, but at that time you had the beauty of they were free, and I was explaining to yourself about how potentially the Inspector General for the RUC might explain very freely in a letter he thought was confidential what his views were on civil rights to the Minister of Home Affairs. So we will have that, what they thought was the confidentiality of government, which has now been rightly exposed, and that's part of the whole transparency angle, which I also touch on. We're supposed to represent government thinking at the time. We're duty bound to allow communities to pass down their collective knowledge through the records, to save the collective historical experience of communities in Northern Ireland, revealing the impact of government actions on the individual or the society. There's the accountability and the list of compliance angles. Then development of region-specific trends. We keep records for all sorts of reasons. In other words, political all the way through to gender, educational, judicial, religious, security, constitutional, geographic, environmental, scientific, health, racial, gender, economic, social, cultural. Lots of reasons why we keep records, in other words, and you'll see some of the variety of those when Lorraine himself show you some of the records we have. And then ultimately, to provide the evidence of legal status, rights, obligations of the individual, group, community, organisation and our wider society. For us, in the so-called narrative is important for the Troubles conflict period, and at the start of that, the civil rights movement and the government reaction to it. So we have a lot of stuff on what they thought about it, what the measures they were going to take to curtail it, and all the thinking behind that. This is just a little image copied from a little booklet we have on Burton Tullet, and it was co-authored by Vincent McCormick, and we have it in our Minister of Finance archive for PRONI. It was actually given to us a long time ago. So this just shows there's a number of you'll see that up in the reading room if you want to go up. It's quite an interesting narrative, and from the start to the finish of that event. Okay, so some of the main archives that I think you should bear in mind when you're looking at this, if you are doing some research. I'm not going to be doing interpretation or talking about individual files, really. Brendan's done that, and that's what CAIN is responsible for. But if you're coming to look at this, the Cabinet Secretariat archive is fantastic. The devolved government in Northern Ireland in 1921 was closely modelled on Whitehall and Westminster. In addition to the Department of the Prime Minister, there were 6 other departments at that time: Finance, Home Affairs, Labour, Education, Agriculture and Commerce. Administrative support was provided by this Cabinet Secretariat, and that's the records we have. Those are the files we have, very detailed and fascinating insights into the machinations of government. And they were an integral part of the Department of the Prime Minister. The Cabinet Secretariat's subject files, so these ones, these type of files here, show the work that came before the Cabinet from government ministries, different subjects, so you'll have all the different areas: home affairs, security, things like that. And obviously there's a significant set of files on the civil rights leading up to and in the wake of 1968. And that's CAB 9B series, which you'll see a couple of examples of here. That's within the Ministry of Home Affairs Cabinet files. Okay, so normally meeting fortnightly, the Cabinet considered various issues of security, financial, economic nature pertaining to Northern Ireland, as well as those of constitutional and political matters affecting its relations with Britain and the Irish Free State. The cabinet conclusion files, which are CAB4, slightly different to the subject files, are 1921 to 1972, and they're only a short summary, and you'll see one upstairs if you go upstairs. They're quite succinct, almost like sometimes a researcher explained to me that it's almost like they're tantalising you a little bit. They lead you to where's the rest of the minutes for this. It's a bit like FOI has done now with government. It's made it slightly not very detailed. But they're still useful to get overview. The short summary of the key points and decisions reached, that's I suppose the important thing is the decisions. And the private secretary of each minister would then reply on various subject matter. And you can see here some of the issues there, 14th of October 68, which Brendan was talking about, key moments there, and the damage and the claims, political aspects, the ramifications of what was happening on the streets. So that's a good archive. That's just a little scanned image of one of them from 14th of October. That is just what they look like, should you come to sign off the terms of need. Okay, Minister of Home Affairs is equally strong for research. It is what became the Northern Ireland Office, so it represents a huge amount of important areas with regard to the Troubles. The portfolio for this department covered police, fire, prisons, the prison exhibitions right beside you there, so they were on that. Administration of Criminal Justice, Public Order, Local Health, Drugs, Vivisection, the Boundary Commission, which in itself is hugely significant at the moment, the emergency legislation. Within that broad remit then, you've several key areas. My favourite, I sound like Brendan, we have favourites because we're nerds. The Secret series at HA32, these were formerly secret files, fascinating gold dust, pretty much similar to the Northern Ireland Office 12 series now. For the rest, if you were a student of the rest of the Troubles conflict period, you'd be looking at Home Affairs 32 first, and then Northern Ireland Office 10 and 12 to take you through to the building peace process, and the Central Secretariat files will take you up to 1998. So you really can get your teeth into the whole period if you wish. The Secret series, obviously they are now declassified. If anyone is unsure, that's not a stupid question. We have government servants asking us, why do you have these files and they're confidential and secret? We only receive them under the Act when they are technically declassified. So it may say secret all over it, you're allowed to look at it if it's got a green sticker. These formerly secret files then dealt with a wide range of issues: civil unrest, protest, disturbances, political subversion, emergency internment operations of the 20s, the border campaign, in the late 50s, the prohibition of legal meetings, processions and assemblies, and of course, why we're here, the developing civil rights movement. And there's a number of important files have gone out on the tables upstairs, of which Brendan has waded through looking for all the valuable documents. He's done a fearsome amount of work here looking through those, looking for all the key documents. And as I said earlier to Lady, as well as coming here to look at the primary sources, of course, I'm not going to do myself out of a job, but CAIN has done an immense amount here to generate what is the most valuable archive online. So you can go there and just see all the most important documents there, and then complement that by coming here and looking at the other archives. But the key stuff you will see is on CAIN, and that's the value of what they do. So just a little pile of documents from, this is strangely enough, someone mentioned the little leaflets. We get these through the Ministry of Defence, a slightly different route. They weren't given to us. The Ministry of Defence used to take these for evidence. Policemen would go undercover to marches and IRSP meetings and things like this. All the difference, everyone from the civil rights all the way through to terrorist organisations, and they would keep them and write where they got them, and then they would go into the Ministry of Defence for intelligence gathering. So we got these off from MOD. We didn't have much for MOD. They gave us this. And it's open to the public, so you can wade through everything from the original civil rights work to the little handwritten bulletins, which were like 1p to buy, right through to the stuff from the IRSP, NLA. I didn't see any UDA ones, but there's quite a lot of interesting stuff in that folder. And then, just to finish off my little bit, some of the other archives that might be of use if you want to develop this research. The CREL is the Community Relations Commission, set up in '69 to encourage harmonious community relations and discourage discrimination. They would give financial assistance to organisations and individuals in the community relations field, and they would advise ministers. So you'll have quite some interesting stuff there, and stuff like New Ulster Movement and Northern Ireland Civil Rights Association. The strange one here, I suppose, is the INF. There's a couple of documents upstairs to represent it. INF is the government machine, which we have now, effectively, probably on the internet. But the Information Service was trying to say, they were singing loudly to try and sing above what was going on here on the streets, to say everything's fine, Northern Ireland is normal, don't worry, here's photographs of how normal we are. And at the same time, it was being undermined by what was happening in reality. So you do have this tit for tat, I hate to use the phrase, but tit for tat of the Government Information Service would see what was going on and then say, oh no, don't look at that over there, here's what's really happening, we're fine. Come and invest in our industries and our tourism and stuff. And so you do have this very surreal, slightly, they would show things like this, but they would show it in a nil light, and they would be trying to say that everything's fine. So it's an unusual little archive, but as you go through the Troubles period, you will find things like, for instance, they've put on the cells and the age blocks to say how disgraceful this is, and this is what a normal cell looks like, and we're all okay apart from a few protesters. So it is very unusual to see that. Finance, again, like I said, there's the other chap, Bo Egan and Vincent McCormick, they authored this and put it into this little part of the Ministry of Finance archive, which is a huge archive covering everything to do with finance. But it's in there, it's up on the table if you want to look at it, it's quite interesting. And then the Northern Ireland Constitutional Convention archive has some material, albeit slightly later than you're focused on. You know, it takes you through from the workers' strike and debated motions and proposals to do with things like sort of the Civil Rights Association and for private individuals. So you've got a little paper presented which they had to consider and give their view. They had no powers, but effectively they were still a well-meaning body. And that's me. That was a bit of a whirlwind, and I was going to say I suppose I was going to give added value when we were about upstairs, and I'm on tonight, working here till 9. So if anyone has any more in-depth questions about how to do research or things, just give me a shout here or later on. Okay, thank you.
Staying with us after the tea break. It's always a bit of a downer when we have your audience go after tea, so thanks very much for staying. I'll just get started here now. So I suppose as Brendan and Samantha and Graham before me and Tricia afterwards, I'm here just to outline some of the key sources relating to the civil rights campaign that are held in this instance in PRONI, and particularly from privately deposited sources in PRONI. Graham there outlined the legislative background through which official records come into PRONI, and he referred to the Public Records Act. That great piece of legislation. It also allows us, we can't compel, but it also allows us to take in records from private sources. So records from individuals, companies, political organisations, broadcasters, in the case of Tricia, as she'll be talking about later on. So these records, I suppose, complement those official records that Graham highlighted in his talk, and at times they can add colour and depth to those sources and allow for different interpretations or different accounts of events, going back to what Brendan was saying in his talk earlier on. So interestingly, myself and Brendan, you probably noticed, had the same image in our first slide. This poster advertising the March in Derry on the 5th of October. Brendan and I were talking about this before you all came in today, and Brendan was saying how the original posters would have been printed in black and white. Eagle-eyed people amongst you in the audience will notice a difference between my poster and Brendan's, which came from the Tower Museum. Brendan's one said public meeting. There was a typo there. So both of our posters were reproduced as part of anniversary events. I presume mine is later than Brendan's, but I'm not sure. So if anyone in the audience has further information about that, we'd be very happy to learn a little bit more. So this poster is is one of a number of posters and other pieces of information within the papers of Fred Heatley, which are held here in PRONI. These papers were transferred to us last year, shortly before the death of Fred Heatley. Fred was a founding member of the Northern Ireland Civil Rights Association and the organiser's first treasurer. So there's a small amount of material within his collection relating to the civil rights movement, including some correspondence, unfortunately not relating to events in the 1960s, but relating to anniversary events. Moving on then, and more than Graham, this is just going to be a very quick overview, but I'm happy to talk at length later on to anyone that's interested. We also hold the papers of another founding member of the Northern Ireland Civil Rights Association, the papers of Frank Gogarty. And Frank was press officer, then chairman, then vice chairman of the organisation. His papers here contain minutes, press releases, statements, and a huge host of printed material as well relating to his position within NICRA. The correspondence within the collection contains a small amount of material dating to 1968-69, including letters and telegrams of support, particularly from organisations in America, from immigrant groups, immigrant support groups in America. This is a telegram from the Bishop of California, Kilmer Myers, who was an outspoken critic, spoke against social injustices in all their forms, and was a vocal critic of the Vietnam War. So a letter of support for him, praying that your peaceful demonstration may underscore the compelling need for an end to political, religious, and economic injustice to all citizens of Northern Ireland. Also within the correspondence section is a letter to Gogarty from James Heaney, who was president of the Attorneys Committee of the American Congress for Irish Freedom. The letter dates from 1969, and in it he states that they had definite information that the Civil Rights Association is being effectively infiltrated by communists. If you don't take immediate action, you will alienate every Irish-American group in the US. To be forewarned is to be forearmed. And so I suppose echoing that within the minutes and handwritten notes in Gogarty's papers are a number of pieces of information which highlight dissent within the organisation, dissent between the more left-leaning elements within the association and others, particularly when the association decided to cooperate with People's Democracy. This is a nice poster within the Gogarty papers. In November 1969, Frank Gogarty, Bernadette Devlin and Eamon McCann all attended a conference in Paris in which they spoke about events in Northern Ireland. This is a nice autographed poster from their time at that conference. Another important figure in NICRA, Kevin Boyle. Kevin Boyle was spokesman for People's Democracy, and he was public relations officer for NICRA. He went on to become a very prominent human rights lawyer and co-founded the Irish Centre for Human Rights at NUIG. The bulk of his archive is held in the James Hardiman Library at NUIG. I was speaking to someone who's with us today from NUIG, and I'm sure, Carmel, you've looked into the Kevin Boyle archive. It's a huge archive there in NUIG. The material that we have complements that archive, and it is very, very useful in that it provides a snapshot of that period, 1968, 1969, and Kevin Boyle's involvement in both People's Democracy and NICRA. The papers include handwritten notes by Kevin Boyle, research material, and again a huge amount of printed material and ephemera. Lots of the posters within the Kevin Boyle collection, and you'll see a couple of them upstairs. As Graham said, we put up a sample of documents upstairs in the reading room. Lots of them, they just showed the hurried nature, I suppose, of the need to highlight and advertise what was going on at the time. Lots of them just drawn up with marker pen or crudely printed, or reusing resources that were there already. This is a poster for United Nations Day on the 24th of October 1968, and it reads human rights, but it's been overwritten by People's Democracy to read human rights for Ulster now. And this particular example is just covered with PD stickers as well. So whatever was to hand was used for promotion and advertisement purposes. PRONI holds the papers of a number of political parties, particularly the papers of the SDLP and the Ulster Unionist Council. Now I should highlight that both those collections are subject to access restrictions. The papers of the SDLP, catalogue reference number D3072, are closed to the public. But anyone that is interested in accessing specific parts of the collection, if you contact us in writing, we will forward the request on to the party who will consider it and get back to us. Similarly, there's access restrictions relating to the Ulster Unionist Council papers. There's a 50-year closure there. You're more than welcome to write into us if there's something that you want to look at that falls outside that time frame, but it's very rare that they let anyone look at anything that's more recent than that. Some of the material within that collection is open, though, material that's largely, I suppose, in the public domain already, but it's useful to access it here. So you're talking about material from annual conferences, election material, press statements, publications, newspaper clippings, and the like. And I suppose just to highlight some of those material within that collection that's open. And it's interesting, I suppose, to look at this material and to look at the evident frustration that unionists felt in the face of hostile public opinion, both locally and internationally. And lots of the papers within the press files reveal their frustration with what they felt was media bias and unfair treatment by the press and by television as well, of course. And there's one speech by Brian Faulkner, an address he gave to the West Belfast Unionist Rally at Ulster Hall on the 28th of November 1968, in which this frustration is very, very clearly articulated. He talks about rising standards of living in the north, population growth, employment, surge in building, and he claims these as successes of progressive unionist governments. He claims that those who participated in the Civil Rights March in Derry, and as he calls them, the so-called sitters on the fence brigade that were with him, where would we be, he says, if they were in control? We would be part of United Ireland, and look at the economic crisis they're facing. And in his address he says, there has been plenty of talk about human dignity, the franchise and civil rights. The mantle of civil rights sits comfortably enough over a well-filled stomach and a warm winter suit, but it is scant protection against the cold winds of economic reality. And the image on the left is from an Ulster Unionist Party printed publication, which was printed to, I suppose, to give the perspective of the security forces after the week of violence in Derry in August 1969. And we have that little pamphlet upstairs for anyone that's interested in seeing it. Other sources of information, I suppose, are numerous. You'll see civil rights or civil rights individuals or people's democracy popping up in a lot of other collections. The papers of the Derry Citizens Action Committee and the Belfast Central Defence Committee, D2560, that really mainly comprises printed material. Papers of the New Ulster Movement are interesting to look at and include correspondence relating to civil rights and their, I suppose, I won't say relationship with NICRA, but certainly correspondence between the two groups. The next two, the next collection there, again, mainly printed material. Interesting, I think, when you're thinking about civil rights, interesting to look at the role of the churches and the standpoint the churches of different denominations and different church leaders took at the time. One example there is the Irish Council of Churches D4602. And if you look at their minute books from the period 1968, from the month of October, they held a number of special meetings directly in response to the events in Derry. And you can see from the minutes that they met with political representatives from both the Unionist and the Nationalist community. And they also were drafting a press statement in relation to what was going on. I just have a bit of it here. So let me see. So their statement issued to the press, a part of it reads, "It rests with all of us who claim the name of Christian to exert our full vigour to make sure that unfair discrimination will be utterly outlawed at whatever level it might be authentically felt to threaten or exist." Papers of individuals as well, such as the peace activist Dennis Barrett, contain information about civil rights and civil rights campaigns, and individual politicians such as the Unionist politician and minister Roy Bradford. There's some very nice correspondence relating to 1968 within his papers here. And I suppose going back to the media point again, in some of the letters he's congratulated by numerous individuals and numerous unionist organisations in relation to his appearance on the David Frost Show on the 14th of October 1968 and his robust defence of the unionist position against Pitt and his fellow travellers in republicanism, as one writer wrote. So very, very quickly now, I just want to take you through how to search our online catalogue. I suppose it's always a good idea to do advanced research before coming into PRONI itself, just to see what we have. So if you manage to find our catalogue, that's a good start. We don't have a standalone website anymore. We're part of the NI Direct website. Sometimes the quickest way is just going PRONI catalogue on Google rather than, maybe that's just me, I'm easily confused with NI Direct. Anyway, there's below this, search the catalogue, there's a useful page which I'd recommend reading first of additional information, which just gives some good tips and hints about how to search the catalogue. Then you can search by keyword, such as civil rights or people's democracy or NICRA or whatever, or by individual name. If you just put in civil rights, you bring up over 500 hits. If you limit it by year, as I've done there, from 68 to 69, it brings up 180 or whatever. So you just need to play around a little bit with the catalogue when you're searching. So this brings up a number of pages organized alphabetically. So you just keep scrolling through, keep hitting next until you see the particular record that you want to view. And that will bring you up the catalogue description of the item in question, this one being from the Frank Bogarty papers. Now, collections that have been catalogued more recently, in the access section there, it will say whether they're open or closed. Some of the older collections unfortunately don't. But any queries you have, I'll give an email address at the end. If you're uncertain as to whether a collection is open or closed, please get in touch. You also have the option of browsing. So if you know a particular catalogue reference number, the number of a particular collection, it's very, very helpful to use the browse facility, and you can just navigate up and down. So here we go. So we're going to go to Frank Bogarty again. See, I didn't trust the internet would work, so here we go. So you've got the different levels here, and again, you can see how the collection is broken up, how it's been classified. So you can select any one of those levels. It will show you the sub-levels within it. When you finally find something you want to look at, you hit View to look at the catalogue description there. So that's just the general email address for anyone that has queries as their research is going forward. Please don't hesitate to get in touch. That's just our opening hours. We're open late on a Thursday until 8:45. And as Graham said, anyone that wants to, after this session, come upstairs to the reading room to look at some documents, both official and privately deposited, that we've laid out, we'd be very happy to have you and to talk you through them. And I'll hand over to Tricia from Northern Ireland Screen now.
Everything I'm going to say hinges on the internet working here soon. Okay, there'll also be some me fiddling about logging into things, so pay no attention to the man behind the curtain in those stages. And like the PRONI catalogue, the digital film archive, which is the part of Northern Ireland Screen I'm from, is incredibly difficult to locate. Hidden on our Northern Ireland Screen homepage. If you watch what I'm doing here, if you click on Digital Film Archive, you'll be at the Digital Film Archive. Magic. So let me tell you about our archive. Well, I'm Tricia Malone. Hello, it's very nice to meet you. So our archive is a lot newer than most of the other ones here. It was established in the year 2000 as part of the BFI's Millennium Initiative, when everyone thought the world was about to end, technology would disrupt itself, everything was going to explode. Very exciting time with the Millennium. So it's Northern Ireland's only dedicated moving image archive, as well as broadcast footage. We hold amateur films donated by members of the public. We have feature and entertainment films, and a wealth of footage from the Northern Ireland Tourist Board, who, due to their dogged persistence to keep filming throughout the years of the Troubles, became known as the Fermanagh Tourist Board at that stage, that being the only place they could safely film. We've also got creative response pieces that we commission, including poetry, music videos and more. And we also have, I'll show you this here. Let's see. This is not the one I want, sadly. Okay, I won't show you this here, I'll show you it later if you're interested. We have some of the first moving image footage in the world, taken by the Lumiere brothers, who invented the Cinecam in 1895, and in 1897 thought better get to Belfast and film that place pretty quickly. The first stage of the archive's life saw footage of Northern Ireland called in from all over the province, including footage from BBC, ITV, UTV, British Pathé. The only unifying theme in acquisition at that stage was the location, so footage had to be from the north of Ireland or made by Northern Irish people, the exception being pre-partition footage or footage from the era of partition, which we also hold. This was selected by one person with no real strategic plan. As a result, the material that we hold is perhaps a little haphazard, but we are working on that now. Where have I put my page? Okay, at this stage, we didn't plan to maintain physical copies. That's not how we archive. We digitize footage and then return the original to the copyright holder, still our basic model. For the first decade of its life, the holdings of the archive saw very little change. In 2013, the British Film Institute began a UK-wide project to restore and digitise cinefilm from regional and national archives within the UK. This was called Unlocking Film Heritage. And we, in the Digital Film Archive, were tasked with selecting material for inclusion. This time, we were committed to selection criteria. This was designed to engage with as wide a range of producers as possible, further dictated by themes selected by the BFI, which included topics like working life, so we have a lot of industrial history, cricket on film, which we don't have anything for, towns and country, and disability was one of their themes. That's yet to be published because they found the material so difficult to work with, which is one of the areas we're actually very interested in our archive. Particularly around our UTV project, which I'll talk about in a moment, and which PRONI are our partners for. So this established the Digital Film Archive as a BFI partner for heritage and access projects in Northern Ireland. So in 2018, the year we are in, the archive underwent its biggest transformation and expansion to date. Through the first 17 years of the archive's life, our holdings hovered at around 100 hours of footage, or some 500 items. After the news that UTV were leaving their premises in Havelock House, having been acquired by ITV, a new chapter began at the Digital Film Archive when we entered into a partnership to save their archive from being shipped off or rehoused elsewhere in the UK. This involves a partnership with PRONI. As well as broadcast footage, as I mentioned, we hold amateur footage, all those features, just if it moves, we'll house it. Our access mandate means that we display as much of our footage as possible on our website. So you can see here, the news section, but anything that comes up here, usually you can play. We use external partners to digitise our footage, so we don't do that in-house, we send that off. And we have a research and metadata officer who catalogues, although we all chip in because it's a huge task with the UTV archive. I think we've gone from, for 10, nearly 20 years, we had 500 items with UTV alone. In this year, we've digitised 1,400, so, and that's exponential. We could do more if we had more time, but we are 4 people in our team. We are not quite PRONI, but we're getting there. So accessing material online is straightforward. I'll talk to you a wee bit about how we catalogue. Let me show you one of our videos. Let's see. So browse, fairly straightforward. Derry, London, Derry. We have a lot of footage from Derry. Just look at any of these. So this is just our privacy agreement, which I don't usually have to accept. So you can see the information along the bottom here. That's just our basic metadata, which will be the place, the year, the length. If it's silent footage, please check that if you're using the archive. Many people make that crucial mistake, including our partners who have called me out for broken computers many times before, only to be told that footage from 1895 does not tend to have sound attached. So for searching, very similar to the presentation before, if you want to search for something, you can search by keywords, which will be attached even though unseen. So these civil rights. You'll get a carnival, which is very exciting. This will call up a lot of material, and because our metadata is not exhaustive, because at the moment we're doing a sort of basic level, particularly with the new material that's coming in, we hope that in the future PRONI will help us to improve our level of metadata, particularly our descriptive metadata, which at the moment is very time restricted. And we also are always open to people getting in touch to let us know about different pieces of footage we have. And we maybe this is going to put me in the field of the archive geeks. We like to think of ourselves as archive detectives. Thank you for laughing at me. With a lot of the footage that we have. So a lot of what I do as access is going out to people and showing them footage and doing screenings. And quite often, if the footage is very local, they can give us information directly on who's in it. And then usually say they just passed away last week, which is very helpful. So each piece of footage as well, you can search by keyword, you can search by year. In the browsing section, it's organised according to our metadata categories. Each piece of footage also generates a selection of related content, which will direct users to connected footage. So this is useful because we select it ourselves rather than linking it through keywords. So that means we compare pieces that might not seem obviously connected. For instance, 1953 footage of housing discrimination might be linked to footage of Bernadette Devlin to provide context for the civil rights movement. So there's some narrative that's possible in how things are connected. As I I said, we're in the middle of a big partnership with PRONI, digitising the UTV archive. UTV, the first commercial broadcaster in Northern Ireland, making its initial cast on Halloween 1959. Spooky! There's a range of programming in its archives, including news, newsreels, light entertainment and educational footage. From January to June 2018, we conducted a pilot project designed to capture a cross-section of their holdings, and following the success of the project, a 4-year programme was launched which sees us partnered with ITV and PRONI. To date, as I said, this has seen us digitise some 1,400 items, a significant increase. Our aim is to make as many of these as possible available online. And thanks to our partnership agreement, this means we can usually upload them directly to our website as we catalogue them. So what we get in, we put there for you to see. However, owing to the volume of footage, this is a slow but steady process, and Anna, who is the person doing this cataloguing, has just snuck in at the back, so if you use the website you can thank her. We have several items from the UTV collection connected to the civil rights movement that we're in the process of digitising but which are not available yet online, including their footage of the first civil rights march, which features in one of the films I'll talk about in a moment, called Ulster, Whatever Happened to the Moderates, but only as a clip, so we also hold the full rushes, which we hope to put online, still in negotiation with UTV. Our ongoing access to the UTV archive means that we can assist researchers seeking particular footage within reason, and the researcher has to be, as usual, very specific. Details are stored on the Strix system, a database used by UTV production to find footage, but owing to the sensitive information held on the database, there is no public access. PRONI share access to Strix with us, and they're the best point of contact for this information rather than ourselves, and they can perform all inquiries on Strix. So you might do this if you came across another piece of footage, say, and you saw in that footage a UTV camera, so you knew that UTV have recorded a particular event, but you can't find it on our website, or you know there's no other access to it, so you can check if it's still in existence through asking PRONI to conduct a Strix search. So if you did that, and it did exist, you would still return to UTV for rights to view or access if it's not yet been catalogued by us. If a researcher discovers a piece of footage on our website and wants to use it in a project, they can contact us directly. If it's non-commercial usage, like screening during an academic talk or a charity event, we are usually able to give single-use permissions. For anyone wanting to acquire footage for commercial use, or if you're making a documentary, anything like that, it's still best to approach UTV. Even though ITV have acquired them, we would advise you to go directly to UTV. So as I've said, all our material is very straightforward. I'll show you the ROI's categories. So the what will be what kind of programming it is usually, and where is the place. So it's basically a breakdown of Northern Ireland and then one category called the rest of the world, which is helpful. So you can search for footage from County Tyrone if you were looking for something that happened there. If you know the year you're looking for, again, it's pretty straightforward. We curate the footage to some degree, so I'll show you that now. Let's see. And this is largely without comment, as even our descriptive metadata would be, obviously. It's just supposed to be basic information, but the way we do curate it is in these kind of collections, so you'll see they're sort of thematically linked. If you register an account on the website, you can curate your own collections, so as you go through and you find things that sit together, you can store them yourself. When you're using the site, we're a very portable archive, which is a nice way of saying we are an archive without a home. But you can use us from the comfort of your own bedroom, unlike PRONI, perhaps. Unless you're doing your e-catalogue research, your pre-research research, if you like. I created a collection on the website of civil rights footage, although I haven't made it live yet. So if you all want to close your eyes while I log in, I'm joking. The password is not that secret. Let's see. Oh, password is not my password over here.
Happens to me all the time.
In front of a room full of people,
No,
really?
not quite.
There we go. Go into collections and make this live later on today. Civil rights. It's just that I need to write a better description for it. So here's some of the media in this. So what I've tried to do with this is to pull together, although the emphasis of today is around 68 specifically, some of the contextual footage that we hold as well. So as I've said, say housing being one of the primary motivators for the civil rights movement. So we have the Fintina documentary, which is actually made by the Irish government. We have a City Solitary, which is about Derry itself, and these are sort of earlier pieces of footage that capture the mood building up to 68, if you like. These are usually documentary features, and some of them are news items. There are a couple that are sort of a bit. There's one called Long Hard Road, which is a John Hume film made to appeal to American donors, basically. We've described it as a call across the Atlantic to fund the Northern Ireland Resurgence Trust, weaving social realism with poetic nationalism. So our metadata is sometimes nice. And I'll show you some of the footage that I've put in this. As I say, I have a little list here of everything. Now, this is not comprehensive in terms of everything we hold, but it's a good sense of what's on the website at the moment. I'll show you one of the films from this. Bear with me, using the search just to demonstrate here. Oh, is this what you mean about the internet letting me down?
It's just a bit slow, Tricia. It'll get there.
Okay, so this is one of our archive favourites, Jim's voice. If anyone's an avid UTV watcher, you might already be familiar with his reportage.
And very near the highest point of the ramparts, at the double bastion, there is one of the most famous pieces of artillery in the entire siege, the notorious Roaring Meg, that made such a great big loud noise during the siege, terrified the enemy. Now, as I looked at it, it struck me that Derry sometimes gets a rather bad press. Roaring megalopolis, if you'll forgive me, the big town that's rather fond of its own voice. Now, in order to redress this rather unfortunate image, I arranged to meet a younger citizen of Derry, a very intelligent young man called Hume, who's going to tell me what he thinks about the future of the maiden city. Mr. Hume, would you agree with me that from time to time an unhappy image is being presented to Northern Ireland of the city of Derry?
I would agree, but I would point out that this image arises from a situation which was not created by the people of Derry, but was created by the history of this particular area. And we have been left with a peculiar political situation here where a minority rules. And as long as this situation exists, I feel that the image might always be rather harsh.
What can be done about this?
Well, there is a growing feeling in the city that the welfare of the city should be lifted out of the party political arena, and that, to be plain about it, that politics should be taken out of the Guildhall, and that the Guildhall and corporation should be run by citizens who, irrespective of the political viewpoint, have the interest of the city at heart.
But Mr. Hume, it has always seemed to me that religion was the real bedevilment in Derry to some extent. What do Protestants do about your suggested scheme?
Well, Protestants, of course, could make it quite clear that they abhor all forms of social injustice. They could make this quite clear to the political leaders. They could impress upon the political leaders that Derry should be treated as equal with the other parts of Northern Ireland.
Stop that there before we all lose our hearing. So one other thing about this search, sometimes you will find that you search for something like this, and it is there, it is catalogued, but it's not available online. There's various reasons for this. Sometimes it's the sensitivity of the material, sometimes the rights holders made a request for it not to be available online. If you want to view or use footage like that, if you contact us directly, we are usually quite happy to arrange for you either to come into our offices to see it or to transfer it to you, again, as long as the use is appropriate. So if you got in touch with me and said, I want to see a particular piece of footage, I would send you this, which is silent. Sure, you're all related. And this is from 1969, I believe. It would be great actually if this had sound. Which is the Apprentice Boys and Bernadette Devlin, sort of milling about in Derry. So as well as our website on which you can access most of our material, we also have a number of archive terminals that are held at partner sites around Northern Ireland. They're in most local libraries. These terminals have access to some of that kind of footage because they use a proprietary archive software rather than the website, although we have changed some of them over. The one in PRONI has gone over to the website because it allows us to update more regularly. But the archive software will sometimes let you see pieces of footage that we can't make available on the internet for general viewing, but that are contained within it. You know, it's got a very similar search mechanism. It's perhaps a little more clunky. If you, as I say, if you want to see one of the old ones, I think Belfast Central still uses the Central Library still uses the archive software. Linen Hall have come over to our website as well with some difficulty around installing Wi-Fi in the terminal, but the less said of that, the better. As well as this, we are constantly taking material in, so if anyone here is a researcher who works with groups who have moving image material that they need a home for, please tell them to get in touch. As I say, we're working towards filling some of these gaps in the collection and using the UTV material to do that as well. Obviously the BBC holds its own extensive archives, but there are moments that one broadcaster will have that another will not. So if you know of any of those gaps, even let us know. I have some business cards because I'm very fancy and professional. If anybody would like one afterwards, yeah, that's our digital film workout.